Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As we begin all of our programs, we like to ground ourselves in the spaces we are occupying. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. MOAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage everyone to learn more about the native lands you occupy by visiting native-land.ca. And we would love to hear where you're joining us from today by typing it into the chat. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. Welcome to We Are the Definers, Fashion and Photography in the New Black Vanguard. Today's program is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, The New Black Vanguard, Photography Between Art and Fashion, on view through March 5th, 2023, here at MOAD. We are thrilled today to have with us 3 of the photographers featured in the exhibition. I will make my introductions very brief and will put full bios into the chat. I want to apologize to everyone for the inconvenience that we are not able to host Sarah Diaf, the fashion designer, today. She was unable to clear her schedule. But we were very excited for the photographers and for our moderator, Rikki Byrd, who are going to have this conversation today. Let me introduce to you, Stephen Tayo is a multidisciplinary artist who hopes to make work as impactful and thought-provoking as it is beautiful. With his work in fashion, art, and photography, he strives to offer social commentary on wealth, class, race, gender, and identity. We also have with us Daniel Obasi. He is a Nigerian art director, stylist, and photographer whose work is deeply aligned with advancing the scope of African narratives visually. And we have Lawrence Agyei. He is a Ghanaian photographer with footprints in Italy and currently living on Chicago's South Side. Today's moderator, Rikki Byrd, is an educator, curator, and writer whose work is dedicated to expanding knowledge about Black contemporary art and Black people's relationship to fashion. Rikki is currently a PhD candidate in African American Studies at Northwestern University, where her research focuses on the way clothing and textiles are used in performances of mourning across the Black diaspora. So please join me in welcoming Rikki, Stephen, Lawrence, and Daniel.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited to be talking with some incredible photographers whose work I really love and enjoy, and talk about the power of their work and what it's achieved. So to start us off, I really want us to begin by calling out where we're from, where we currently are in the world, and what time it is, just because I think it's fascinating. So I'll start us off. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, currently living in Chicago, Illinois, where it is 2:07 p.m. And we are enjoying really weather that is not normal for Chicago during this time. It's 70 degrees here, and so it's good. We're all trying to get out and enjoy it today. How about you, Stephen?
Hello, everyone. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm currently in Marrakesh, and it's 8 p.m. at the moment. The weather is gets chilled at night. Yeah.
Thank you. Daniel, how about you?
I'm currently in Paris. It's 9:07. So it's pretty cold outside. So like my heater is like turned up because I'm not really used to the cold. Yeah. But I'm originally based in Lagos, Nigeria. Yeah.
And Lauren?
Hi. Yeah, originally from Ghana, based in Chicago. And just like Rikki said, it's super warm here today, which is interesting. I'm trying to enjoy this warm weather because the cold is like around the corner. So yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna get cold here soon. So I wanted to start us off that way because I think what's really incredible about this particular moment that we're living in that's filled with so many things, but it has allowed us, the four of us, to, gather here together from around the world in this digital sphere, to engage in conversation, to share our talents. And in many ways, that's how images and style and fashion circulates mostly these days, are through digital platforms like social media, Tumblr, so on and so forth. And so I would love to kind of start us off in the conversation, actually reading from Antwaun Sargent's introduction in A New Black Vanguard. So Antwaun Sargent created this project to celebrate Black photographers across the African diaspora. And he writes, quote, "For this generation of artists, developing an alternative photography has meant working with traditional publishers, but also circumventing them to place their photography in physical and digital spaces where they can control the editorial voice," end quote. So to start us off, I would love to hear you all discuss your engagement with the digital world and how it has shaped your practice. Stephen, maybe you can start us off, because I know you have a project that you created in 2020, I believe, called What If, which was catalyzed by your observance of the way drag performers were using the internet, as you put it, as a kind of means of refuge.
I think for me, I always sort of like engage the platform, social media, by using it as research based and like, conversing with people and also trying to hear feedback and trying to sort of understand the dynamics of how, things can happen using the understanding of how things could be different in different parts of, for example, in Nigeria. And I mean, social media has sort of enabled me to communicate with people saying, "Oh, how do you think I can maneuver, driving through, let's say, Ibadan, for example, or the States," and using people who live there as somehow sort of like a map, a safety map. That could be one, a sort of like ways to, research in advance, to go to places and like, ask them for, out sort of like maneuver traveling, for example. So I think I'm using that and also like building on that for my project. I would say it has helped me find a way to first build almost like an argument that could be vague, right? And then do the follow-up by, sort of interrogating, conversation about, ensuring that, it could sort of have some meaningful, extensiveness to what we go through in life. One of the very weird stuff that we went through, for example, during the NSAS protest in Nigeria was, even after having the evidence of social media as some sort of evidence for, the shooting and the gunshots that happened, the government are still saying that's not enough, for example. So, and that gave us, almost like an everlasting proof that we held on, using social media, for example, as an evidence. And in relation to my project, for example, I was able to connect with like these, group of people living across Nigeria, in Abuja and Lagos, by just having conversation around what, dressing up means to them. And they were able to sort of open up to me to say, for me, this is not a way of looking for any validation. For me, it's like a form of sort of like escape in a way. And I felt like it meant something to sort of building a work in relation to the NSAS experience, because I wanted to sort of create a work that could be in conversation with what we experience, in the sense that there was like this mainstream request for freedom, and I don't think freedom should be subjective in the sense that the people made it seem during the protest. And it was interesting to use the series to extensify what freedom could mean to different group of people. So the headspace of the project began using the people that I met, using them mostly on Instagram and Twitter, and building a conversation around like the project, and having spoken to them for a couple of months, and like we're able to like meet at the middle where it was sort of comfortable for them, while they were visiting Lagos, and while I was visiting them where they are based. And it's also like a continuous sort of effort for me to sort of keep shooting the project. So I've only shown the first part of the project, but because of the resourcefulness of social media, I've been able to sort of like engage more people.
That's
I think
incredible. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. Lawrence and Daniel, what about you and kind of how the digital realm impacts your photographic practice?
Yeah, I can go, Daniel. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, and it brought me back to when Tumblr first came around, and Tumblr was such a like a different type of platform where creators were able to like share their work, and get inspired by other people's work. And that was the first time for me being able to like just share my work and get other people's feedback, or even like meet other photographers that were on the same platform. And I do remember using that and being on that platform every single day, and just being able to see other photographers from other parts of the world, right? This is before the Twitters of the worlds and the Instagram of the worlds. Tumblr was the place where you could go and just be inspired. You didn't have to like even share anything. You just feel super inspired by. I remember seeing Daniel's work on Tumblr, and it's just like, oh, like this is in Nigeria, like this is kind of crazy. I never see anything like this before, So I would use that inspiration. I would try to like bring it into my work, So that's the main thing that comes to mind. And also just like I feel like Tumblr became like a very like community-wise, like for photographers, it became so huge because you were able to like meet off of Tumblr, you're able to like meet those photographers or those stylists or art directors in real life. And it already felt like, you guys have been friends for so long, So yeah, that's something that I think about a lot, and how Tumblr really like shaped how I do my work, And I'm still on Tumblr right now, privately. I know it's not popping like that anymore, but shout out to Tumblr. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
It's funny that you brought up like Tumblr, because I also do have like experience or like history from like back then, here in Lagos. When I started like creating, I think I was still in uni, and it was a very unpopular genre, very creative, quirky work. It didn't have a platform. You weren't going to take it to any publication or any magazine. No one's gonna pay for that. And so at that time, I think it became very imperative that, finding or building a community of creators was kind of like important. And I think the most interesting thing about social media to me when it comes to my career and like, my work, was how organic everything was from like the jump. So, there weren't all this, expectation to create work, or all this, pressure. It was just like you had a vision, you had an idea, and you come together with your friends, you shoot something, and you put it out there, you know. And I think for me, one of the very key things I remember was like, I went on Google, I think, what year was that? And I just searched for like Nigeria, like I typed Nigeria and listed. And I think I was trying to find images to use for, I used to work as a graphics artist in a company then. So I was trying to find images to use for like an Independence Day artwork. And a lot of the visuals that were coming up were not really that great. You know, it was either the pictures were fuzzy or they just had like this weird, there's such a huge disconnect between what I thought was possible and what a lot of the artists who were from Nigeria were putting out into I guess the internet space. So when I came into like the Tumblr era, I ran into people like Yagazie, I ran into people like who else? Joseph Adamu, who's a Nigerian. And these are people from different parts of the world who were doing photojournalism, creating like conceptual work. And, you know, and for me, it was added a whole different nuance to what you would see whenever you typed Nigeria or typed Lagos. Or I think so. I think that kind of like defined for me why I was very excited about using platforms like, you know, Tumblr, like Visco, like Instagram. I know then I just had a mobile phone, so I would travel and I would just like take pictures and like, you know, I would write some interesting quotes beside it and I would post it up and tag, you know, the location of where I was. And for me, it's looking back from here, it's so interesting to see that something that just started off so, I guess, playfully and without so much thought has become such a huge part of why or where I am today. Yeah.
I love this. I love all of the platform call outs, the Tumblr, also Visco. Thank you for bringing that. I forgot about Visco. Visco was a really incredible moment, you know, like I'm no photographer, but I was acting like I was a photographer with Visco. It was a fun platform to be on. And I also appreciate you all bringing up kind of how both images and these platforms allowed you all to develop community and see each other, but also in a way, what I'm taking from what Daniel was sharing too, kind of also like correcting the record, right? Of like what people had assumed these spaces look like, right? And assume that this is a history of the past or whatever the case may be, right? And how you all's photography intervenes in that, but also how the new Black Vanguard as a project, right, is about kind of correcting this record, again, of what we have come to understand photography to be in relationship, of course, to fashion, in regards to like, who's the photographers taking pictures of all the covers of major publications, so on and so forth. And in preparing for this conversation, Daniel, you reminded me that the new Black Vanguard book actually came out 3 years ago now. And which is wow, you know, because it's still so potent, it's still so much on our minds. And of course, the exhibition is still traveling, which extends the book to incorporate additional photographers, right, that Antwaun Sargent has researched and contacted. And so how has the project, how has the new Black Vanguard impacted your practice? And it could be, you know, through community, you all meeting each other and learning about each other's work. It could also be about your visual practice. And then what do you think about the reception of the book in the arts industry and the fashion industry?
I think one of the good feeling of the book is also seeing, you know, so people that I've sort of known about, and also people from like, I mean, Daniel, there's Nadine, there's Ruth Osai. So there's a couple of people who I've sort of known for a bit, and also like having to share the same platform is sort of inspiring to me. Also, the reception has been great. I think I was working on a project, and the editor said, because you said something that is in relation to what we are working on now, we felt like, you know, it would be a great fit for this for this story that we're working on. So I think there's obviously like an open up of like, opportunities and like obviously like, meeting new people who I haven't been able to meet in person, but through the book, we're even sort of like, either feel some sort of connection of being, also like sharing the same platform. I think it feels good to see people like you and to see people who you've sort of looked up to share the same space together.
Yeah, I think I look at the Vanguard, the Black Vanguard, and it kind of reminds me of what Dawu Bey and Ming Smith and Anthony Barboza had back in the day. They had that workshop in New York, and it was just a group of photographers coming together, and they just wanted to build together, and pretty much showing the Black experience through their eyes. Because at that time, what was out there as far as the Black experience was not well represented for us. So it took these photographers to pretty much started changing it. And what Antwaun was doing, I feel like, it was like a response to that kind of representation by adding all of these different photographers into the book and also the show, So I think it's something that people are always going to remember. I remember going to the show and seeing my photograph in it and just being excited that I was part of these many photographers. And I think the most beautiful thing about it is that a lot of us are not, there's some photographers that live in London and, Nigeria, Ghana, Chicago, New York, but I feel like we all have the same kind of vision. It's just to like tell stories through our eyes. And, because the Black experience is so vast, it's so big, but the main thing is to always, change the way, people have been seeing the Black experience, so yeah, that's how I feel about the Black Vanguard experience. Yeah.
Andy, what about you?
I mean, I feel like they've said so much already that actually like accumulates what we all feel about the Black Vanguard. But for me, I think it was a kind of like an interesting project to be on, because again, being in the same room and in the same space as, people who you look up to, people whose work you also find to be inspiring. And they're all Black artists, which is not something that you really see a lot of, so having that, and to be honest, when I look back at every single person who was in that book, it's kind of like, whoa, we've all come so far, and but one thing hasn't changed, the vision is still the same. So everyone is still pushing, their idea of what is the Black experience or how can we improve and all of that. And I think that's just the wonderful thing about it. And I'm excited to see what the next generation of a Black Vanguard will look like.
It is. It's incredible to see how far all of you all have come to and how many other photographers in the book writer are now photographing for the covers of these major publications and for editorials and so on and so forth. But I thank you for the reminder, Daniel, that like their voice and vision hasn't shifted, right? It's still very much so focused on centering, Black folks and their work. So we started in the digital space, but now I actually want to take us like back to before we were engaging with the digital space and hear you all talk about how you came to photography and fashion. What are those first experiences that you remember with the photograph or with the camera or with clothing that impacted or kind of let you know that you wanted to pursue this as a career? We'll go the opposite way. We'll start with Daniel this time.
Oh, child, I was already like, let me chill back. Okay, so but I always tell people I never really started out wanting to work in art or fashion or photography. I kind of just found myself here, but I haven't left because I feel like this is where I was always supposed to be, or this is what I was always like, supposed to do. I've always been very like imaginative as a young person. And one of the first things I wanted to do, and when I did in terms of art was like writing, you know, and I thought I would one day end up as a lawyer. So um, I think one of the moments I remember clearly that kind of defined for me, like, okay, this is might be it, was when I think I was in uni, and then we normally in school you go to your third year, you go out to this place called in Badagry, and my eyes just kept capturing or just taking in a lot of like visuals, you know, from people in the street, from, you know, even in school, people just chilling, architecture and like just the landscape of it. And I just was very curious as to what all of that would look like. And not having a photographer or any photography experience, or having anybody who's a photographer around me to even help me, like, you know, document these things or even photograph the ideas that would come into my head, made me go, like, every weekend I would travel back to the city and I would go rent a camera and I would bring it back to where we were just to take pictures or this thing. And then I would be like, okay, I will send it back. So I had a lot of technical problems at that time. But for me, what my eyes was seeing was very important for me to capture. You know, I think I did my first editorial project there, I think was called Minstrel. And it was there's just this sort of feeling of surrealness, you know, and it's also where you have the point of no return, like one of those very ancient slavery ports from Lagos. So like I think my whole experience there and trying to just journal everything and like living there for those period of time kind of like sparked that, oh wow, I could actually, like, you know, pursue this as a career or actually develop this thing further. So yeah, I think I owe a lot of my journey into photography to that trip.
Lawrence, I know in our one-on-one conversations, you've talked about your childhood in Italy and how photography played a role in your childhood, and that was some of like your first engagement with photography. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for me, I would say my time in Italy pretty much like shaped everything that I'm doing right now. And starting from seeing photo albums that my parents used to create, and then they would just have it at home, and then just me being obsessed with pictures and images and just flipping through them when I was young. Um, and I think I would say from when I was like 8, 9 years old, for some reason, I understood the power of documentation. So I went ahead and took my dad's cameras and just started documenting whatever that was around me, you know. But as far as like fashion and style, I do remember being around my neighborhood and seeing different cultures from like Morocco and Tunisia and Ghana and Nigeria, and everybody just pretty much representing their culture with their clothes. And you will go to like to somebody's house that's from Tunisia, and it's like you're in Tunisia, you know. So I used all of these things, all of these little things into my work, you know. I do like that's something that I always pretty much think about all the time when it comes to my work. I was just so into already like seeing colors into the African wear, right? I feel like now like kente and you know, different garments from Nigeria or like parts of Africa are so popular now. But I do remember back then just being so into it and just taking pictures or using my VHS camera to just like document what was going on. Funny enough, I just found some VHS tapes of when I was like 13, you know, documenting my neighborhood and seeing all of these like different like things, you know, going on, you know. So yeah, I think that definitely shaped my practice right now 100%. Something that I think about every time I'm either doing a project or a personal project or like commercial. Like I try to think back to when I was young and use that to like, you know, push the work.
Stephen, what about you? What's some of your, what kind of drew you to your practice?
I think for me, since I went to the same uni as Daniel. We both went to University of Lagos. And since my first, I think, second semester, first year, I've always assisted so many people and volunteered to assist fashion designers on set and photographers on set. They were not working as a fashion photographer. The interest to make fashion photography came when I started, sort of meeting some fashion designers who were giving me their clothing to do whatever I wanted to do then. So I think a lot of my practice came more as somebody who was just interested in assisting, as I didn't know the assisting would make me sort of fall in love with the practice itself. So I was just interested in something I could do while I was, in uni. So and when I was in third year, I was already sort of thinking more about, different ideas about looking, deeper also into practicing photography, also using fashion as my standpoint. So I think a lot of the things I did for not being bored sort of ended up being, what I now settle for as my career.
I love that. So in addition to your personal kind of experiences in getting to your creative practice, you all are also heavily researched in your practice. You all have these reference points. You're engaging with other photographers, but you're also, engaging with kind of archives and other canons that you have created for yourself for particular projects. Sarah isn't here, but I was going to bring in an example from her practice, and she has, in addition to her fashion brand Tangaro, has a magazine called Le Magazine Noir, and did a dedication to Malik Sidibe and how he was such an influence on her work. And so I just love to hear you all kind of call out some influences, whether it be in your practice or whether it be for specific editorials that you've done or photo projects. Lawrence, I know you have a project where you've been influenced by Dawood Bey recently.
Yeah, recently I've been studying a lot of Dawes Bay work, especially the ones made in Chicago. I feel like he created such body of work where one can go back and just, there's always something new whenever you go back into his work. So I pretty much use that as to my to start off my project that I'm still, kind of working on right now. But then I also have James Barner, who's an incredible photographer from Ghana. I would say the first photographer in Ghana, but thinking about that question for me, I honestly didn't know that there were any Black photographers until I moved to the States. And then I found out about Gordon Parks and, the Hubes and Latoya Fraser, a lot of master of photography. I didn't find out about any of them until I moved to the States, and Tumblr again started sharing a lot of these photographs. So seeing that, I was like, oh, these people are creating work of people that look just like me, are stories that I can relate to. So that made me even want to study more, you know what I mean? So I would say James Barner, Dawood Bey, there's so many. I remember the reason why I found out about the RZ67 was from Anna Leibovitz. And I was like, oh, she uses the RZ for her portraits. I would love to go and get that camera and see how would that work, So yeah.
Daniel, I see you over there
So,
thinking.
no, I was trying to unmute the thingy. It's quite true.
Do you want to go first?
Oh, I thought we're going. Okay, sure, I'll just go. I think for me, when it comes to inspiration, is because I come from a literature background. So growing up, I read a lot of books. So I got introduction to the visual scape quite much later on. So even when it comes to photography, I'm always like leaning back to cinema or to, you know, storytellers or writers. I think some of my favorite writers are like Buchi Emecheta, who wrote Joys of Motherhood. Even Wale Soyinka, when you read his books, and what's it called, even Chinua Achebe, and when you even broaden it further, you look at the works of like Ousmane Sembede, who are like, you know, African French, was it Senegalese or French film directors, Jibril, who did the Tuki Buki. So like that, for me, when I came into this, I felt like there was such a huge disconnect between our literature and photography, as well as like, you know, film, you know, like the industry. So whereas when you look into like the Francophone countries, there's a beautiful marriage between that. And I think that kind of like inspired some of the aesthetic I was always working on from initially. And, you know, trying to figure out what is the Nigerian aesthetic when it comes to photography, what is the Nigerian aesthetic when it comes to visual storytelling, you know, like how, what is even the Nigerian aesthetic when it comes to like presenting beauty, because a lot of the images there were always super airbrushed, you know, were always so perfect, and they were focusing on people who have a lighter skin complexion. So like even with my work, I began to, you know, like even as early as back then, you know, I began to, you know, try to lean towards the other end of the spectrum and, you know, draw on the images that come to my head when I read stories or when I read books, and try to like, you know, bring that energy or those emotions into like the body of work that I was making, and then build off of that to start questioning what and what is right in the society, or what and what is not right in the society, or how can we like, you know, move forward. Yeah.
Some of my inspiration was sort of looking at the works of James Bannon and Hassan Ajaj and like Malik Sidibe, how they've sort of been stuck on huge representation of where they're from. Also, like, you know, representing in such a very like, you know, elegant way. And for me has always been something that stood out for me. And like, I always go back to, you know, flipping books from especially like James Bannon. And I feel like there's so much that can be studied about, like, I mean, about these guys. If I'm not flipping through James Bannon's book or like catalog, I'm always looking at like some of the images as San created like, you know, 30, 20 years ago. So for me, I'm always in meeting these photographers because I'm a big fan of what they've done and what they are doing. Yeah.
Love all those, and I love the literature component too as an influence in bringing together image and literature. So in addition to these influences, which I think you all have been speaking to throughout this conversation, your works are also shifting what we see, where we look, right, for fashion, where we look for photography, places that, you know, a lot of people did not look before. And so it's really your work and the work of a lot of the photographers in this project are moving beyond that Eurocentric point of view that's dictated both these industries of art and fashion. And so as we kind of near our closing, I want to kind of also bring back in Antwaun Sargent's introduction. And he writes, quote, "The emerging class of Black fashion photographers are inserting their own fantastic narratives into the contemporary as a way to show those values they consider culturally significant," end quote. And so I'd love to also just hear you talk about your process, right? Like, how do you arrive at a particular subject matter? How do you go about visualizing them, telling that story? Sometimes it's film, right? Sometimes it's styling. Sometimes it's through an editorial. And Daniel, I was hoping maybe you can start us off, because I know you have a new project out, a new book titled Beautiful Resistance, that's being published with Louis Vuitton. So one, congratulations, but also can you talk a little bit about the theme of Beautiful Resistance and how you arrived at that subject and your process in creating that project?
Oh, yeah. So Beautiful Resistance. So that's kind of like my debut photo book, you know. So I think the title in its own represents a lot of like things I have experienced, you know, living and working here as a queer artist, or also what I've experienced just like, you know, with my friends or just being there, and just the constant, you know, fight and struggle to make space for yourself and for people just like you to be able to create work that is true and honest, you know. And I think it was a lot of the thoughts around that always comes back to the people who hold power, or people who actually hold who make the decisions that affects, you know, minorities, you know, like the politicians, the families, the religious establishment, all of that. And, you know, living in Lagos, which is where I'm from, where I have lived for a while. So creating the book was very important for me to kind of like turn the lens in a much more deeper way, and not just approach a story that was like, you know, just superficial or showing how, you know, gorgeous the city is, because we all know it's a beautiful city. But I wanted to peel back the layers a bit more, especially because even leading up to, because I started working in the book in 2019. So leading up to that, there was like a lot of conversation amongst like groups about like, you know, the need for things to change in the country in terms of like the government, you know, the need for people to be able to express themselves more. And I think a lot of queer people, young queer people, were more bold. And I think that boldness is kind of like what I've never seen before. And we grew up, people being afraid of like, you know, saying who they were, or, you know, or just expressing themselves. So, but I'm in this space where people are online advocating against the government that refuses to see them, you know. And for me, that was very like key for me to like, you know, center in my first project, or my first project as a book. So yeah, and a lot of the things around it, you know, goes down to sexuality, you know, goes down to feminism, which is still treated as a minority from a minority point of view here. And, you know, I think during the NSAS protests, I was so inspired by what the ladies who make up the feminist coalition did. They're not usually, they're usually focusing on women's rights, but during that particular protest, they took up such a huge mantle in coordinating, you know, aids for people, feeding for people, bail for people. And this was something I'd never seen before. And I was like, yeah, we need to have feminism be centered more in the work that we do, because, you know, you can't skip over it. You know, I know back in school we're rarely thought about feminists, you know, like I know, like I was researching about like, you know, Nigerian feminists, and one of the only ones they talk about is Fela Kuti's mother, how, and the most thing they know about her is the fact that she drove a car, whereas she led a love riot. She was such a huge pain in the ass for the Europeans. And I think we need to embrace conversations like that. And I think with my book, I wanted to at least give space for that as well. And just to, you know, hopefully trigger more conversations around activism, you know, and how that can actually help all of us globally, or even just as a country. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Stephen and Lawrence.
For me, I think there's always like different like ways to come about how I make my work. I mean, obviously, like the big one is always using my course of study, which is philosophy, to develop question and like, you know, and which is why my titling always has this sort of, you know, existential sort of throwing it into the air. What if, or something like, you know, which Lagos you day, or, you know, because for me, I think, I mean, using that to develop visuals is one of the things I felt like, you know, it's a part for my work to do. And in making my work, I always think about how do I improvise in actually what is happening now, conversations from my family to my friends, to my community, to my neighbors, to where I reside in Lagos, to you know, when I'm in the taxi, or when I'm on the bike, or when I'm in the bus. So for me, it's always like trying to ensure that like, all of these things from my headspace, and how, you know, to really like visualize them is like, you know, trying to, you know, you shoot today, and then you look at what you've done. And sometimes you think it keys into like the conversation you're trying to have. Sometimes you have to sort of try all over again, which I normally do. And I've now enjoyed working on a project, shooting more extensively, you know, because I really also want to see, you know, where the project can take me to, rather than finding a balance in between. So I'm always trying to sort of like, you know, encourage and push myself to think deeper and like, you know, use now different like, you know, ways to come about, you know, making of the work. Now I'm thinking about a lot of sound, soundscape as a form of, you know, additional medium to my body of work. So for me, it's always about how to not leave anything behind, because I was heavily inspired by sound, because when I was in uni, I mostly stayed with like visually impaired students, and I wanted to ensure that, one, I don't have to, you know, explain too much about what my work is like visually. How do I sort of encourage, or how do I ensure that, you know, the work sort of pass across everyone? Because I have a friend who I'm really close with, that I developed like headspace of project with, but he actually never sometimes see what the work looks like. So for me, I felt like, you know, how do I, tap into, sound, or like, motion, or something that is more, that is beyond like visual. So then I can pass, for example, the message to my friend and to more people, and how to sort of like have like a replay of the work, right? Using sound. I mean, I'm also like, constantly like always asking questions about, I mean, what were you doing before? How was this from? Or do you think it's possible for me to come in your space? So there's always going to be like a question and answer. It's never ending, I guess.
Thanks for sharing. What about you, Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like photography is such a transformative experience, such a transformative process as well. Being able to just come up with an idea, or just like, being inspired by what's going on around you, by going outside and having certain conversations that can inspire your process. But for me, I think like because of my work, like my work is mainly shaped by my identity, whether it's a celebration of Chicago or my Ghanaian heritage or my Italian heritage. But with this recent project that I have going on, that we're working on together, that's more of a showing a new reflection of Chicago, and and kind of mixed with documentary, and I would say style and fashion, because of the type of things that they wear, the type of like, I would say costumes that they wear, and kind of to go into the project a little bit, the project is based on this performance arts band based in South Side of Chicago that was found in 1980s to pretty much get young people off the streets of Chicago and put them in a group and teach them how to perform, dance, and use the power of sports and dance and music. And just being in that space, just like Steven said, just being in that space and learning about their own process. It's inspired my process as a photographer, and yes, asking questions and understanding the history, countless hours of research and learning new things as well to add into the process. But also as a photographer on the technical side, I'm pretty sure, I feel like all of us here, we use analog photography. That's a whole process in itself. Pre-visualizing the image before you actually click the shutter, or taking it to the darkroom, or printing the actual negative. That's a whole different process. Plus actually creating the image, So I think it's just like, it's such a, like, we can go on and on and on when it comes to process, because we all have different process, but like being able to really understand, like I said, being that transformative experience, and whether you're actually pre-visualizing the image or you already created the image. And I think it's just something that I don't know, just powerful, just very, very powerful, and it's something that I don't take for granted at all. Being able to be in this position and create the type of work that we're creating, I think it's powerful and beautiful. Yeah.
That is a beautiful way to end our conversation. This hour went by so quickly. So thank you all so much for engaging in conversation with me. We're all on different time zones and we made it happen. And it's been so fruitful. And I hope that the audience out there enjoyed the conversation. We have a few minutes for anyone who may have questions for our panelists here. Well, if we don't have any questions, I will invite Daniel, Lawrence, and Stephen to close us out with sharing any upcoming projects or anything that you want our audience to look out for and support you in, so we can keep engaging your beautiful work. Lawrence, I think you concluded your response talking about an upcoming project of yours. I don't know if you want to share that.
Yeah, I do have a project coming out really soon, and a first book for the project. The project it's called Zero Team, and documented this group of young boys and young girls who use performance arts to pretty much, they use band and they use music and they use performance as just a way to just stay out of the things that pretty much normally happens in Chicago, without going in too much deep into that. But I have that coming out. I have the book, which I'm pretty excited about. And then top of next year, God willing, I would have a film as well. So.
Daniel, your book was recently published, right? Beautiful Resistance.
Yeah, it was recently published. So yeah, I mean, the book is out. So that would be something to get some more support on. I know I'm in Paris for I'm also going to be in Paris during the photo festival. So if anyone is around and wants to say hi, you can also drop by. I do have some things that I'm working on behind the scene, which I cannot talk about, but but yes, please, just keep in touch.
And where can we find the book and purchase?
It's now back on Amazon. It was in there for a while. Yeah, it's back on Amazon. It's on LV's Intermelvi stores.
Okay.
So yeah, it's there. And yeah, also you can visit my website if you want more details on or my Instagram.
Amazon and the Louis Vuitton store or Daniel's website. Awesome. And Stephen, what about you? Anything upcoming for you that we should look out for?
I'm currently showing my very most recent body of work, Which Lagos Today, and Now Gallery in London. Is going to be there for the whole of next month. So if you're ever in London, please stop by. And I also have a show with African fashion, also which Daniel is showing at the V&A Museum. If you're also in London, it's on to, I think, next year.
Yeah.
You can stop by. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Elizabeth, I don't know if you were going to come on and close us out. But again, thank you all so much. Thank you to the Museum of the African Diaspora for inviting us to participate. And I'll hand it back over to Elizabeth before we head out.
Thank you so much, Rikki, and thank you, Stephen and Daniel and Lawrence, for sharing all of your wisdom and your thoughts about the new Black Vanguard, photography, and art and fashion with us. We really appreciate you joining us from all over the world, like Rikki mentioned. And I would like to just remind people that if you are in the Bay Area, we would love for you to please come and see us and view the new Black Vanguard exhibition. It's up through March 5th, 2023. And we love hearing from you, finding out what you think about our programming, what you'd like us to do in the future. So if you could please fill out our online program survey. I put the link in the chat, and it should also pop up once you close this Zoom. We would love for you also to support MOAD, become a member or donate, whatever feels comfortable to you. So you can always do that on our website at moadsf.org. And we also have lots of programs, virtual and in person. So please, again, check out our website, moadsf.org, to see what's coming up. And we hope to see you here in the museum or on Zoom. So thank you all so much for giving us your time and your thoughts. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Speak soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
I